Jamie Brennan felt like a failure. The once promising artist had seen his career stagnate, his inspiration waning with each passing year. Critics had called his early work bold, raw, even genius. But now, his canvases sat empty, his mind a blank slate. Desperation drove him to the cabin. The cabin was nestled deep in the woods, miles from the nearest town. It belonged to a friend who had inherited it but rarely visited. Jamie jumped at the opportunity when it was offered, a secluded escape where he could focus on his art without distractions. The building itself was quaint, with weathered wood siding and a stone fireplace. It felt timeless, untouched by the outside world. The first few days were uneventful. Jamie set up his easel by the large picture window overlooking the forest, hoping the serene view would ignite his creativity. But the ideas didn't come. He spent hours staring at the blank canvas, his frustration mounting. The silence, initially comforting, began to feel oppressive. Then came the first knock. It was faint, almost imperceptible, like a branch tapping against the cabin's exterior. Jamie ignored it at first, assuming it was the wind. But the knocks persisted, rhythmic and deliberate, always coming from the same spot inside the walls. He searched the cabin, checking for loose boards or an animal that might have gotten trapped. He found nothing. That night, Jamie dreamed of blood. Thick, crimson streams ran down the walls, pooling at his feet. He awoke drenched in sweat, the metallic scent of blood lingering in the air. He dismissed it as stress, but the unease stayed with him. The knocking continued over the next few days, growing louder and more insistent. Jamie tried to drown it out with music, but the sound seemed to cut through everything. Then the whispers began. At first, they were faint murmurs, indistinct and easily dismissed. But as Jamie worked, they grew clearer, forming words that seemed to echo inside his mind. "Create," they urged. "Bring it to life." Jamie was unnerved but intrigued. He had heard of artists finding inspiration in unlikely places, but this felt different. Darker, more insistent. The whispers weren't just encouraging him, they were demanding. One evening, while sketching aimlessly, Jamie's pencil took on a life of its own. His hand moved with a speed and precision he hadn't felt in years, producing intricate, haunting images of faces twisted in agony. The sketches were unlike anything he had ever done, filled with raw emotion and dark beauty. For the first time in months, he felt alive. The next morning, Jamie noticed a dark stain on the cabin wall near the fireplace. He approached it cautiously, the metallic scent of blood filling the air. The stain grew darker as he watched, a single red droplet seeping down the wood. He touched it, and his fingers came away sticky with blood. Despite his fear, Jamie couldn't look away. The blood seemed to pulse, alive and almost hypnotic. Instead of cleaning it, he set up his easel and began to paint. His brush moved with a frenzy, the image on the canvas forming before he even realized what he was creating. When he stepped back, he was stunned. The painting depicted a man standing in a pool of blood, his face obscured by shadow. The detail was breathtaking, the emotions visceral. Jamie sent a photo of the painting to his agent, who called within minutes. "This is incredible," she said. "It's your best work yet. Whatever you're doing, keep it up." Encouraged, Jamie threw himself into his art. The walls of the cabin began to bleed more heavily, the crimson streams creating patterns that seemed almost intentional. The whispers guided him, urging him to capture the horrors on canvas. Each painting was more disturbing and more brilliant than the last. But as his art flourished, Jamie's grip on reality began to falter. He heard the whispers even when he wasn't painting, their tone shifting from encouragement to command. His dreams grew darker, filled with images of violence and sacrifice. He woke each morning with the sense that the cabin was watching him, its walls closing in. One night, Jamie painted a scene of a man wielding an axe, his face twisted in rage. The next day, he found an old, rusted axe leaning against the cabin's wall. He hadn't seen it before, but it felt familiar, as if it had always been there. Jamie's curiosity about the cabin's history grew. He searched the small bookshelf in the corner, finding a dusty journal tucked behind the others. The leather cover was cracked, and the pages were filled with spidery handwriting. It belonged to Marcus Vellum, the cabin's original owner, and, Jamie realized, an artist like himself. The journal detailed Marcus's descent into madness. He had been a celebrated painter until he retreated to the cabin, seeking inspiration. Marcus wrote of the whispers, the blood, and the unrelenting drive to create. His work became darker, more violent, until he could no longer distinguish his art from reality. The final entries were the most chilling. Marcus confessed to sacrificing his family, believing their blood would fuel his genius. "The cabin demands it," he wrote. "It lives through the art, through the blood. It will never stop." Jamie slammed the journal shut, his stomach turning. He thought of his own work, the violent images that seemed to flow from him without thought. He glanced at his latest painting, a haunting depiction of a figure standing over a woman's lifeless body, an axe in hand. The figure's face looked disturbingly familiar. That night, the cabin seemed to pulse with energy. The walls bled freely, the whispers turning into screams. Jamie barricaded himself in the bedroom, clutching the journal like a shield. He knew he had to leave, but the cabin wouldn't let him go. Jamie awoke to find the door to the bedroom wide open. The whispers were louder than ever, urging him to pick up his brush. "Finish it," they commanded. "One more, and it will be complete." But Jamie had seen the truth. The cabin wasn't just a place, it was alive, feeding on his ambition and despair. The paintings weren't his creations, they were the cabin's, brought to life through him. If he continued, he would share Marcus's fate. Summoning every ounce of willpower, Jamie gathered his paintings and dragged them into the yard. The whispers grew frantic, pleading with him to stop. He doused the canvases in gasoline and struck a match. The flames roared to life, consuming the paintings in seconds. The cabin seemed to shudder, the walls groaning as if in pain. But it wasn't enough. Blood poured from the walls, pooling at Jamie's feet. The whispers became deafening, a cacophony of anger and desperation. Jamie realized the cabin would not let him leave unless he destroyed it. Grabbing the old axe, Jamie swung it at the walls, splinters flying with each strike. The blood sprayed him, but he didn't stop. The cabin seemed to fight back, the air growing thick and oppressive. Finally, with one last swing, Jamie struck the foundation. The cabin let out a final, ear-splitting scream before collapsing in on itself. Jamie stumbled away, his body battered and his mind frayed. As the first light of dawn broke through the trees, he turned to see the smoldering remains of the cabin. The whispers were gone, the air still. Weeks later, Jamie returned to the city, leaving his art behind. He couldn't bring himself to pick up a brush, the memories of the cabin too fresh. But at night, he sometimes dreamed of the walls bleeding, the whispers calling his name. And he wondered if the cabin was truly gone, or if it was waiting for someone else to find it.